Fantasy Winners and the next episode of Tee to Green. And this is going to be a strategy video. I've got 5 different subjects to get into with everybody, and they're all actually pretty much related. They're all going to have to do with GPPs for the most part, and they're all going to have to do with strategic things, of course, like when it comes to like ownership, unique lineups. We got the Millionaire Maker coming up, so there's going to be some things maybe that particularly tie in with the Millionaire Maker. Some things with salary remaining and things of that nature, and so and then we'll get in a tiny bit more into just the concept of maybe just specifically majors, which is obviously the Millionaire Maker too. So in any case, let's just get right on into it. The one thing I want to say though before I get into topic number 1 is just because this is kind of an underlying theme here for these first few points, or really all the points, quite frankly, is just remember in GPPs, you are trying to win the GPPs, not just cash. Now, obviously, most of the GPPs out there have gone to be a little bit more flatter payout structures than be quite as top-heavy as in comparison into the past. I don't know why, other than just to say maybe the DraftKings and FanDuel and those places, they would like to just increase the more amount of people like winning cash or just cashing, maybe so to speak, and it brings people back more. I don't know, that would just be my theory, but in any case, doesn't matter. GPPs, you're still trying to obviously win the tournament one way or the other, and that's especially true in the Millionaire Maker for how top heavy that event usually is, and not just cash like you would be in cash format. So I know that's extremely obvious to most people, but I just wanted to say that just for the few people that are new and have actually asked me about this recently. We always get some new people asking. So in any case, let's move on into topic number 1, and that is about having a unique lineup in GPPs and why it matters. So the simplest way I could put this for why it matters is that if you have a lineup that is shared with somebody, or even multiple people, which is worse. The more people, the worse it is. So if you share a lineup with somebody, your potential winnings go down significantly, especially when you have these really top-heavy prize pools because you're trying to win. So if there is a prize pool where we're playing the Millionaire Maker and okay, yeah, the winning prize is $1 million, and you share a lineup with somebody, and you do just happen to win, then your only potential winnings is 500,000. And for the amount of times that you're gonna have a chance at actually winning the Millionaire Maker, and with that happening, that is a very much a losing proposition over time. The Millionaire Maker is already a little bit of a lottery as it is, obviously, but just having a shared lineup and having potential winnings get cut in half, get cut in a third, get cut in a fourth, no matter what GPP you're playing is, that's a really bad thing. So how do you avoid that? We'll break this down to DraftKings and FanDuel. For DraftKings, it matters a little bit more, and you have to do a little bit more with DraftKings in comparison to FanDuel. So for DraftKings, the easiest thing to do is just to leave at least $200 on the table, maybe $300 if you want to be really safe. But really, the number I would go by is $200. And here's why. I've been gathering some ownership data, and I will actually post an article on this either maybe just before football season. Perhaps I will wait until the very beginning of 2018 when golf kicks back up then. But I've been gathering some ownership data over the last year or so, and in a few different ways. And I'll again, like I said, I'll post the data, the exact data and everything like that, and you guys can take a look at it. But for right now, I'll just cite a few examples from it for the data I do have so far. And that is, if you take a look at all the GPP lineups, over the last year or so, about 2/3 of the GPP lineups use all the salary or $49,900, or leaving $100 on the table, if you will. So that is the easiest way to not put yourself at high risk. And then the other thing I will say is, if you're wanting to know like how many lineups are unique in GPPs, people have been getting a lot better about this. It used to be the difference between cash and GPPs actually wasn't that much a few years ago, but now we're finding that in GPPs, about 80% of the lineups are unique, 75 to 80%, I should say, to be a little bit safer. But then if we take a look at cash formats, we're actually talking about, 20 to 25% of the lineups only are unique. And so that basically tells you there are a lot more sharps involved with the cash formats, and they're definitely more aware that they're just, obviously making the same lineup or same couple lineups, and they're entering it a bunch of times and everything like that. And so, and obviously the ownership doesn't matter because you're just trying to to finish in the top half for the same payout. And it's a very simple thing to understand mathematically and why it works out that way. And so, so for DraftKings though, just if you want to avoid sharing a lineup with somebody, just leave at least $200 on the table. There are a few other things you can do, and we'll actually be touching on them in some of these later points in the video. But that's just the easiest first step that you can make to help yourself out. And obviously, the more money you leave on the table, the greater your chances are you'll have a unique lineup. But really, $200 is like all that's really necessary. And you can go a little bit more than that too, of course. But the difference, and if you're worried about the quality of your lineup, if you're potentially a little bit new to daily fantasy golf, the difference between using all the salary and leaving a couple $100 on the table is essentially nothing. And in fact, sometimes it can even be better. You have a better lineup leaving only a couple $100 on the table because, as we found out this year, more than the last few years certainly, the DraftKings pricing does not reflect the sportsbook odds very well. It certainly does it to a certain extent, of course, but it just doesn't do it as well as it used to. So leaving a couple $100 on the table does not make your lineup worse. If you're leaving like $1,500 on the table just to be like incredibly safe, that is absolutely not necessary, and that is actually making your lineup worse. That's just too much money in my opinion. So as for FanDuel, you don't really need to do much here, because the main reason is FanDuel, you're rostering 8 golfers instead of 6. And so you obviously have significantly more amount of combinations you can make, obviously, with 8 golfers in comparison to 6, and a lot more possibilities. The salary structure is a little bit different, but also as well. But that's the main reason, is 8 golfers versus 6. And so you don't really need to do much about worrying about a unique lineup. The only time you're really going to put yourself in danger is if you're playing one of the biggest GPPs with the most amount of lineups and most amount of people you're playing against, and you pick all chalk. Then you're kind of asking for it a little bit. You could still get away with it and be safe and be fine, but you're still kind of asking for it, and you don't want a bunch of really highly owned people in a GPP lineup anyways to begin with. I mean, it's fine to have some, but you don't want everybody highly owned. So in any case, that's just the main reason why. So let's move on to point number 2, and why GPP ownership matters. Okay, again, we're trying to win the GPP. So there are 2 things that are required to win a GPP. You need to have the winning golfer, and you must have all 6 guys in your lineup make the cut. We're talking about DraftKings here. The only exceptions to this are if you're playing the $5,300 Thunderdome, then you're obviously only got like a 10, 20 person pool or competition you're playing against, only 10 to 20 people playing really high stakes. And the other exception to this is if the winner of the golf tournament is like 1% owned and it's like a really cheap golfer. This actually happened with Siwoo Kim at the Players Championship, but like there are very rare exceptions where this does happen, where somebody at like 1% or less wins a tournament, but and it's a really cheap golfer, but it's extremely rare. And so it's not a big deal. And I'm actually going to touch on that again a little bit later on in the video. So in any case, that is but for all intents and purposes, you need to have the winning golfer and have all 6 guys make the cut. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to get an edge on the field is to take a look at ownership for the $6,000 to $7,000 players. A lot of times you will find the ownership for certain players in the $6,000 to $7,000 range on DraftKings are owned just as much, if not even more, than some of the guys in that 11K range, 10K range. Well, maybe not 11K, but more 10K range and 9K range and anything like that. And obviously, you would much rather have a 9K to 10K golfer than a 6 to 7K golfer, almost no matter who it is. There might be like 1 or 2 exceptions, like in the tournament, but like for the most part, you're always going to want that. And so one of the easiest things you can do is to fade a 6 or 7K golfer that's going to be really highly owned. Now, obviously, for the people who've been following my content, I've been doing the lists on the forum a lot each week as far as which golfers I would fade in the 6 to 7K range for this specific purpose. And again, as far as the guidelines go, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, it depends on the tournament exactly who the golfer is and how much I like the player. And at least for my opinion, or how much you like the player is much more important, is what I should be saying. But in any case, if you're getting golfers that are going to be like 25% owned, who are in the lower 7K, 6K range, those are guys that you do not want to be playing in GPPs, because even though they may be really good odds per dollar plays, may have really good recent form, at the same time, the odds of that person missing the cut versus winning or even getting a top 5 finish or something like that are significantly greater still. And so it's just it's much simpler to grab somebody else around that price point. There are enough good plays usually every single week in that price point that you can easily grab somebody else that's about just as good of a play and will be owned significantly less. Sometimes it's like a third of the amount or a fourth of the amount, and it depends exactly who it is and whatnot, of course. So that is really the main reason why, because and just to make sure you understand what I'm saying here, if you do fade somebody that's 25% owned and he ends up missing the cut, you've just knocked out 1/4 of your competition of who you're going against. That's really the most basic example I can give for why it's important. And so let's move on to number 3. So this has to do with ownership as well, and just kind of comparing the ownership between DraftKings and FanDuel. So I do ownership projections, and give them. I post them in the forum usually for the majors. And one thing that I think sometimes, I look at other ownership projections too. Sometimes at other sites, some people I think do a good job, some people I think don't do a very good job, or something like that. For the ones who I don't think do a great job, what I do, the very first thing I do to see if they're doing a good job actually, or I think they're doing an accurate job, is to add up the the projected ownerships of what they have and see what it adds up to. And for DraftKings, if it adds up to a number that's not 600% or very close to 600%, or on FanDuel, if it doesn't add up or very close to 800%, I already know that the ownership projections are pretty much crap, because the easiest way to just give ownership projections to make sure they're at least, you should be working from something accurate, is that the ownership projections actually have a chance of being correct. And because obviously if you're if you have 6 golfers you're rostering on DraftKings, you're going to have a total of 600% when you add up all the ownerships. It's going to be 800 for FanDuel because you're rostering 8 golfers. So it's the easiest way to just check to see if a site is doing a good job with ownership projections, or at least very close to it. I mean, maybe some sites just get very close to it, but if it's something where like you're on DraftKings and you find the ownership projections are equaling 500 or 700%, that's a problem. That's not good at all. So in any case, but comparing it to DraftKings and FanDuel, what you have to do is, because some people I know have been using some models and some lineup generators, and they want to use the same player pool or roughly the same player pool for DraftKings and FanDuel, and it's a tough thing to do when you're trying to balance out the ownerships and the player pools. Because obviously the total ownership in the entire tournament will be 800% for FanDuel, 600% for DraftKings, like I said. So what's going to end up happening here is with FanDuel, and specifically more the cheaper golfers, you are going to get some pretty inflated ownerships for the cheaper golfers a lot of the time, especially since FanDuel seems to have, as bad as DraftKings has been, sometimes FanDuel has been as bad, or they've just gone this way. I don't know, maybe bad's not the right word here, but FanDuel doesn't follow the sportsbook odds at least as much as DraftKings, if not a little bit more. So that is the main reason why. So you're going to get a lot of really good plays a lot of the time here, and they're really cheap. But at the same time, you have to factor in that, some of these guys, usually the cheapest guys on DraftKings, who are in that mid 6K range to mid 7K range, or even upper 7K range, the most of that player is going to be owned is like 30%, 35%, I should say, in GPPs. On FanDuel, we've seen much higher than that. We've seen in the 40s, maybe we've seen a 50%. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, no pun intended. But it's just to say, you have to factor in that the ownerships on FanDuel will be a little bit inflated naturally across the board. But because of the strategy of fading the cheaper golfers, you'll still want to be using kind of that same concept in FanDuel that I've given out for DraftKings. I don't really have, again, like I said, I don't have a good target number, and I especially don't on FanDuel just because I'm still a little bit of a learning process because it's new and some people are changing strategies on the fly a little bit, I think, and I'm just not also collecting the ownership data as well or nearly as long for FanDuel. So it's a little bit tougher to say exactly what you do at what point, but it's still the same exact concept. You just have to factor in that the FanDuel ownerships are going to be a little bit inflated, but nevertheless, at the same time, that's going to be particularly important for the cheaper golfers as opposed to the expensive golfers. So, okay. That was number 3. We got 2 more. This one is going to probably be the longest, hopefully not. But This is for the Open Championship, or the Open, I should say, and now find out it's now called. It's specifically the Open now. So that's coming up this week. So we've got the Millionaire Maker, obviously, and a lot of people playing GPPs in general. And I've had a couple people ask me about, the maxing out to 150 lineups or 100 lineups or whatever, and everything like that, and what should they do for player pools and ownerships and things like that. So I'm going to say this for a player. This is mainly going to be around player pool. There are some people out there and some good DFS players, and generally speaking, that do pretty small player pools while maxing out lineups in entries. So like I know there are people out there that do 150 lineups that only use like a 20 player pool, or maybe like 25, 30 player pool. That honestly to me is crazy. I definitely do not recommend that. That doesn't. It's all preference and what strategy you want to do. I will say that first and foremost. But I will say I don't think that's a great strategy for the most part. So, and here's why. It is essentially an all or nothing play that is very risky, and it just very likely won't go well. Even though you are limiting your player pool substantially, and you want to have like all the combinations of like a smaller group of people and just go all out, and that's like kind of your concept behind it, you still, even making 150 lineups, you still aren't anywhere close to getting all the combinations with like even as little as like a 20 player pool of making 150 lineups. If you ignore salary availability for a second, pretend you were just picking any 20 random golfers you wanted and the salary thing didn't matter. There are 38,760 different combinations. If you are picking 6 golfers from a 20-player pool, and you can pick any random 6 or whatever, there's 38,760 different combinations. Now, obviously, you do have to factor in the salary available. And some of those combinations are not possible, because if you let's say you have a 20-player pool and you have guys like Dustin Johnson, Rory McIlroy, Henrik Stenson, Justin Rose, and Brooks Koepka, and Sergio Garcia, and your 5 or 6 year guys are like upper 8K range and above. Well, guess what? All the combinations using most of those golfers, or some of those golfers with like the upper 7K golfers, those combinations aren't possible because you'll be going way over budget. So obviously, those combos are not possible. So that means 150. It's not 150 out of 38,760. So that should be a good thing. Well, the problem is those combinations that you are losing that are possible. Those are by far the best combinations, and so you're losing your best possible combinations out of this. And so it's just at the end of the day, you're going to be getting, you'll have some fine lineups, really, obviously in there. You'll have like a couple of like your top plays and then your best plays of like the mid 7K range or whatever, and you're going to have some good lineups. But again, because you're limiting yourself to a 20-player pool, and the goal is you're still trying to make really good lineups, some of those combinations you're going to be making, you're going to be leaving a ton of money on the table. So like you'll be leaving over like $1,000 on the table and everything like that. And that, at the end of the day, if you're having several of your 150 lineups that are leaving a ton of money on the table, that means your lineups just simply won't be very good comparison to others, no matter how much you like the plays. That's just not. It's just not going to be a very good situation. And anyways, even if you do score where like most of your golfers do make the cut, and you have a core of golfers that are doing well, that hardly means you are going to win, because in the Millionaire Maker, again, like I said, in GPPs, you are trying to win the tournament. It doesn't even guarantee you anything on the very small chance that you do even quote unquote get this hit. And so for people out there who are, you want to max out, let's say you have some money and you want to go big on this week, or you want to try even just a cheap GPP and you want to max out at 150. Usually what I recommend to people is I would do at least a 50-player pool for 150 lineups, like around a third, so to speak. And you could even do more than that. You definitely can do more than that. I wouldn't go like crazy, like over 100, but the more players here, the better, because if you essentially the theory behind it is you have to think of it almost in terms of buying shares, if you will, because at the end of the day, there aren't going to be that many golfers who are really highly owned. There are only so many golfers that are going to be like 25-30% owned, whether it's, really expensive guys or the mid 7K guys. And so you have to think of it more in terms of buying shares of like the guys you really like that just won't be extremely highly owned. Now, if they're the top salary golfers, then the ownership doesn't matter as much, but it pertains back to what I was saying about the fading of the 6 to 7K golfers if you fade a couple of those really highly owned ones. But you buy some shares, like for example, there are maybe like 8 to 10 golfers you really like in that 7K range, and they're all going to be owned maybe around like 5% or something like that, then just buy 10% on a bunch of different golfers and throw all those different combinations out with some of your favorite expensive players, so to speak. Like that is more, I think, a winning scenario for you than just going all out and limiting it as much as possible, because it is very difficult, we found out, just to get everybody through the cut, and let alone have obviously 6 guys that are near the top of the leaderboard and have somebody win the tournament. I mean, just to say this really quickly, if you're wondering on average how many lineups on DraftKings have 6 of 6 guys make the cut, the average number, I believe, each week, where is it? I'm not actually exactly sure what it was at this second, but at least for this year, it's about 11-12%. That's about the average every single week. And so in major championships, it's actually usually a little bit less than that, because there's the quality of the players is significantly better, and usually the conditions are tougher, and it can cause a little bit more variance in certain ways and things like that, even though usually like one of the best players usually does win a major. But so in any case, that's my recommendation. You don't have to go like specifically by me, or you can do whatever you want, of course, but I just usually am a bigger fan of a wider net of players. That's obviously educating, you're trying to make good picks, but just while fading a couple of the really highly owned cheaper golfers. So hopefully putting all those pieces together, hopefully you get a little bit of a better understanding on where I've come from on giving some of the advice, and I hopefully it maybe clear some of the things up for the newer people who are playing catch up a little bit. And so those were 4 things. I do have a 5th thing to get into, and this is a little bit more. This is strategy as well, but it's also a little bit of correcting a narrative, I guess, if you will. And I'll just get into this right now. The 5th thing is, and this is especially true for majors, just don't be afraid to use a lot of good players who will be lesser owned in like I said, specifically major championships. This does not mean going fishing for like a bunch of golfers that are 500 to 1 to win the tournament who are 6,200 and you're stretching for reasons to use them. No. I'm talking about there's kind of been a little bit of the quote unquote narrative of like, oh, we have all these first time major winners happening over the last several years. This must mean the concept that anyone can win. Well, yeah, anyone can win, but if you actually look at who's been winning the majors over the last handful of years, they're really good players. The U.S. Open was Brooks Koepka. He is obviously somebody who is priced in the 8 to 9K range in major championships, and he hits the 10K range a lot of the times in like the standard PGA tournaments. Obviously, Sergio Garcia, somebody who was certainly on the cheap side at the Masters. I think he was like mid 8K range, but obviously now he's being priced more fairly where he should have been all along is the 9K range and even 10K range in some of the biggest events, and then even up close to 11K in some of the weaker PGA Tour tournaments. And so, and you can go back farther than that. It's like, the duel between Henrik Stenson and Phil Mickelson. Henrik won that. Henrik Stenson, obviously one of the top players in the world. Dustin Johnson won the U.S. Open, and obviously last year, and that was a first-time major winner. He obviously is not a bad player. You can go to Jason Day at the PGA Championship in 2015 on this long run of first-time winners. Like, yeah, Danny Willett won at the Masters, but even when Danny Willett won at the Masters, and obviously he's kind of faded off, he's not been playing that great of golf. I mean, at the same time, at the time, he wasn't like an unknown player. He was priced in the upper 7K range. He had been playing very well at the time. It wasn't like he was a complete unknown player type of a thing. Even Jimmy Walker last year when he won the PGA Championship, that was a little bit of a surprise just in the fact that his recent form wasn't ideal. But he is actually somebody that really, I think, is very underrated, and he's been battling Lyme disease this year, if you didn't know that, so that's why he's fallen off a little bit, and it's obviously very understandable if you're battling Lyme disease. And so, and I think he's actually playing really well for somebody under that condition. And so, but in any case, Jimmy Walker, he's made several Ryder Cup teams lately. He's, he's playing like a top 20, top 25 player in the world for a good chunk of the time in recent form, or in recent history, like over the last few years. And so it's just a note to say when you're quote unquote buying these shares in the majors, and if you're going to be making 150 lineups and all that, that's just kind of my belief on why, even more so, why I would be buying shares in some of the slightly lesser owned guys that are still very good players. That's really the kind of putting all the pieces together, if you will. And so, in any case, that is it for this video. I hope this is all very useful information. If you've got, again, like I said in a previously, if there is a video you would like me to do, or something you think, we discuss, maybe, through email or Twitter or whatever, that maybe isn't, like, you're not quite understanding and you think needs a little bit further explanation than just some messaging, I would be happy to do a strategy video on a specific topic on one of these, maybe a little bit deeper. Just let me know, of course, as always. But I've been trying to get the best topics and best discussions I've had and kind of pair it up together. But this format seems to be working, so we can just keep going with this. Just a reminder, also, I know I've said this multiple times, I've only got about a month left of DFS golf. Then I'm jumping over to football. The PGA Championship will be the last Tee to Green episode I do for the year. I plan on doing Tee to Green again in 2018 and returning for the SBS Tournament Champions. I will let you know if something changes or format changes or something like that, of course, obviously, but absolutely no intention or plan of doing that at all. And so, in any case, but we got a month left. Let's get some winning lineups out there for the Open and the PGA Championship and the tournaments in between. So, I'm at Nick Yuskevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners. I'm at Nick Yuskevich on Twitter. Obviously, you can see that. And then for our YouTube channel, always appreciate the likes of the videos and the subscriptions as well. And thank you for watching, and best of luck.